Welcome to another episode of Stir Crazy on the Real News Network. This is the show we made so we wouldn't go crazy. With our hosts, Andrew Corkery, Leandro Lagera, Tunde Ogunfolaju, and myself, Charles Lenchner. This is the Real News Network's latest show, and we'd love your feedback. Let us know if you're here and what's on your mind today. Are we helping you survive another day in isolation? Well, it looks like we have the name of at least one person that got a lot of us hot and bothered, and that is Andrew Yang, formerly of the Yang Gang, former presidential candidate who inspired a lot of pride in the Asian American community. But he recently stated in an op-ed on Wednesday in the Washington Times that a preferred response to the rise in anti-Chinese and anti-Asian racism in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic is that maybe Asian Americans could embrace their Americanness and try to become part of the solution, even though they're not responsible for the virus existing or proliferating. We have Leandro Lagera, who is on staff at the Real News and is also part of the Chinatown Collective, an AAPI group here in Baltimore. Leandro, what do you have to say about Yang's approach?
I mean, there's really a lot to unpack from the op-ed that he wrote. I mean, the very first thing that kind of struck my mind is he said the wrong approach is not to tell people to stop being racist against Asians, which blows my mind because you probably should.
Wait, hold on. Let's just pause for a moment. You're saying that when people are being racist in public, we should tell them not to.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like common sense, but Andrew Yang is arguing that that doesn't quite work. That doesn't mean you still shouldn't do it. I mean, it's not as if we're living in a post-racial society. There is still racism, but if you see something, you should say something is a pretty good rule. The other thing that kind of struck me is that what it feels like when he says Americanness, it feels like he's saying whiteness. He's telling us to subdue kind of our Asian culture and embrace being American, to do things like wear more red, white, and blue, to volunteer for more things, to show that we're present in terms of this crisis, but at the same time trying to mute kind of what makes us Asian. And this isn't necessarily new. I mean, going from, say, the Chinese Exclusion Act, when Asians were part of the Yellow Peril, to kind of evolving into the model minority, it was all about being taught how to assimilate, being taught how to wear a couple different masks, where you have your own mask at home with your parents and with your culture, and then you wear another mask when you go out into kind of mainstream society. And basically, we've all been taught as Asians to kind of hide our differences and just try to fit in. To me, though, what the difference is when Andrew Yang says it, and he's a pretty prominent kind of Asian American, but he's also, in this day and age, he's kind of admitting there's something wrong with being Asian, and that being Asian is related to the coronavirus. I don't know if he necessarily meant that, but that's kind of the implication of saying, kind of dampen your Asianness so people don't notice, so people don't think that you are perpetrating the coronavirus, which, the basis of that has been debunked, and we all know that the coronavirus isn't discriminate when it comes to who it attacks. So the implication is a lot more threatening, a lot more kind of deadly. And when Yang is saying that, to avoid being a victim of hate crimes or racism, just mute your Asianness. And I don't know if that's something we can do, but it's also something that's kind of infuriating because, at the end of the day, the coronavirus has nothing to do with being Asian.
Well, it makes me think of how one of the issues is the model minority myth, and that for years now in social justice circles, I've been hearing about that myth as a problem that we should refrain from feeding into when we see it, even though there's an aspect of it in white society that looks like it's complementary. It's actually racist and bad, and don't do that. And Yang here What are we learning about him that he's leaning into that myth instead of recognizing it as a problem?
I mean, I think it's better called a wedge issue instead of a model minority. That's kind of a euphemism for that. For years, they've used Asians as kind of a wedge minority to prove or to show, like, this minority could do better, or this minority looked at the way we behave and such. And that is essentially the root of the model minority myth. But also what we're finding right now is that, the model minority myth is kind of a false flag, because as soon as something like the coronavirus occurs, all of a sudden we're the yellow peril once again, from way back when they had, it sequestered Asians into only certain parts of the city where they can live, which gave rise to the modern Chinatowns, again, to the Chinese Exclusion Act, to Japanese internment camps, et cetera. It goes and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So if I can jump in real quick. So, when I heard these comments, what I kind of thought about at the time is like, what does that even look like? Right. Show your Americanness. And I thought, I was kind of daydreaming about it. I was like, do you just show up to a place with like your USA hat on, and you've got your hot dog in hand, and you're singing God Bless America? Is that exactly what it looks like? I think that,
no. The irony about that statement is that, most Asians are first, second, or third, or first or second generation immigrant. And being Asian and being an immigrant is exactly what makes us American. From the true traditions of how Americans have been grown up, your culture is what you contribute to the society that believes itself to be a melting pot, right? So to kind of dampen that means that that's not necessarily welcome here, but that seems to go against the face of what America should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could add one more thing, just a super, super quick story. So I remember not too long ago, I actually had the opportunity to attend a citizenship ceremony, and going to that was a little bit jarring because you sit down and they go through, all the speeches and things like that they give through the people there. And then they get to a point where they start showing you videos, and they show a video of Donald Trump. And if I'm not mistaken, they actually did play God Bless America or God Bless USA at one point in time. And it was just jarring to kind of see that, of this sort of forced conformity when they're, the person who they had giving them this, this video, this speech, has told them in no short terms that he gives zero fucks about them, and in fact has deep disdain for them. So, with Andrew Yang's comments, I think that, I hate using words like problematic, but if he doesn't see kind of the era in that logic of just put on a USA hat and say gosh darn it a lot, and people will be nicer to you. That's bullshit. And I think somebody of his stature should be tuned into things like that.
It's frustrating to know that in different parts of the country, Asian Americans are being beaten and harassed in the streets of our cities. And someone like me, no matter how much of an asshole I am day to day, is not going to ever have to prove that I'm American to anyone. I suppose that's what makes me most American of all. I don't know if that's going to last, or if we have to edit that comment out. Moving on. I did want to pause for a moment, and I forgot to do this in the top of the show, is kind of check in with folks about where we're at. What's it like on this day, 20-something, 30-something of being in self-isolation? How does anyone even remember how long it's been?
This is the end of week 3.
Wow. Time flies.
Yeah. So what are we discovering?
It's weird. It feels like this has been going on for like a year, even though it's like 3 weeks. I mean, but at the same time, it does feel kind of quick, because there's all these different, as I was talking about on the show yesterday, there's all these different sort of, mundane issues that you have to deal with, that become so much more cumbersome in this crisis and become even more compounded because of the way that the government, particularly in the United States, is reacting to this crisis and or not reacting to the crisis. So I think it's kind of a mix of, isolation and, loneliness that kind of gets brought on by that, but also just, just not understanding like where the future is going to go, even more than we already didn't know before.
Right.
Yeah, and Charles, I don't know if you're going to toss to anybody in particular next, but I'll just jump in. So I've got two things that I've been kind of focused on, at least the last like couple days. One is trying to like come into terms with like my own empathy or my own ability for empathy in terms of like right now I feel like I'm weathering the storm pretty well. I don't feel like I've had any sort of like major issues in light of what's going on. In fact, for a person who's I kind of do like to kind of keep to myself. So this is a weird sort of space considering that. But having empathy for people who are in just complete disastrous situations right now, and keeping them at top of mind versus just going about your business as if, this is just a stay at home vacation, that you've got. I think it's key to like staying like tuned in to like what's going on in the world, because depending on what your situation is, you can be super isolated from the craziness that's going on just outside of your door. So that's one thing. The other thing is completely stupid, but I've gone back and I've started watching a lot of 90s wrestling. So no matter what I'm doing, that's exactly what I'm doing. If I'm working or if I'm just chilling, there's a chance that 90s wrestling is going on in the background. And for a number of reasons, I probably shouldn't, because I know the fates of a lot of those wrestlers. But it's one of those guilty pleasures.
Who's your favorite wrestler? And we're gonna ask.
Is that like New World Order 90s wrestling?
That's exactly. Yeah. I just got to the part where the New World Order forms, and I'm excited. I'm getting my popcorn ready. It's going to be exciting times. But my favorite wrestler from the 90s has to be. It's a toss up between Shawn Michaels and Sting. I think I like them respectively for their own reasons. But yeah, it's kind of hard going back to watch some of that stuff, because again, how some of the how the story ends for some of those wrestlers, and it's a little bit hard to watch. But yeah, I watch nonetheless.
How about you, Leandro?
I think are we answering the best favorite wrestler question?
Favorite wrestler, yes. Any franchise.
From the 90s, I guess The Big Show or Sting. And maybe the Ultimate Warrior.
Okay. Yeah, he just got fired. I got to the point where he got fired again from the WWF. So that's about the third time.
Andrew?
Well, I would just like to say real quick, when I was a kid, I went to the barbershop and I had. What's that?
What do you mean when you were a kid?
Yeah, I know. That can kind of be brought into mind sometimes, occasionally, with different things to do. But anyway, when I was a kid, this hits on the wrestling point. I had the WWF logo put into back of my head by the barber at the barbershop, and my mother let me do this so many times. And we would go to church, we would go to the grocery store. The amount of looks that this woman must have gotten, with two other children with her and me with the WWF inscribed in the back of my head by a barber. Hey, I mean, God bless her.
She got the thumbs up.
Did that include like a rat tail and a mullet with it? Or?
Nah, it didn't at the time. It could have very well progressively gone to that. But yeah, I did have that going on, and I loved WWF as a kid. I think my favorite wrestler would probably be a toss up. I don't know if it counts as 90s, but The Undertaker. Or
that counts as the 90s.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, The Undertaker or Rikishi. I mean, I liked him a lot too. He was a lot of fun to watch. I was like, whenever Rikishi came on the scene, I was like, all right, this is gonna be weird. Whatever's gonna happen here, it's gonna get totally weird. I'm not gonna know exactly where it's gonna go, but it's gonna be fun. So those are my two people.
That was great. I need help remembering who the ones I remember were. There was one character who was like a generic Arab. And I always remember watching him and thinking, this is a weird time to be doing that, given that, in
the
93
Iron
we had a
Sheik?
Gulf War. And
The Iron Sheik is like 80s. Like, I can't remember who's the Arab.
There was
the only person I can think of is the Iron Sheik. I can't.
But he was early 80s, mid 80s, I thought.
Yeah, but he bled a little bit into the 90s though,
Okay.
just like at the very very beginning of the 90s. But I'm guessing that's who you're talking about, Charles.
Well, I just remember being like, "Go Iron Sheik" or whatever his name was, because that looked like a lonely person. Anyway, that was great. Thanks, guys. We're gonna. By the way, anyone noticing that we have an all male roster today, just know that we're planning an all female roster next week. So our second story today. Now we're turning to Janet Yellen, the former chairwoman of the Federal Reserve. And in an article that we're looking at from LA Times, we're noting that she is saying, and this is quite reasonable, that the effects of this recession are going to last for many years, not months, that we should stop thinking of this as a temporary thing, but something with very long-lasting effects. Thinking about that, we need to understand that if people understand how severe this recession is, they're going to make it more severe, because the kind of sensible financial planning that we might do as an individual when you know that times are tough is to stop spending and save and take care of the most immediate needs and maybe nothing else. But if everyone does that, we prolong the recession. If, however, people believe the lie that this is a temporary blip and they continue spending and don't pay no mind to the fact that everything's terrible and will be for a long time, why that kind of fantastical thinking might just jumpstart the economy soon after the social isolation period ends. Tunde, where are you on this?
Yeah, so I'm reading this article, and I've really been into like translating what people are saying, like cutting around kind of like the fancy words, the flowery language. Basically, Janet Yellen was basically saying that during this, shit's about to get wild for the next few years, homies. I don't know what to tell you. And then the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, they also had a quote from him, and his quote was basically, "Yeah, we're fucked." I ditto everything Janet said. And as I'm kind of going through this article, that's the sort of the idea. Nothing that they said in this was like revolutionary to anybody who's been paying at least even half attention, that any sort of idea that this is only going to last for a couple months or a few months is a fantasy, and if we as a country believe that, we're only worsening our situation. So I think the best thing to do with this is like, this might be a little TMI, or not TMI, but this might be a little weird way to take it. But like, it's like if you get like an STD, right? You're not going to be like, let's just ignore this until like it just magically goes away. No, you gotta admit what happened. Go get yourself checked out, and hope that works. Hope whatever shot they give you, whatever pills they give you, rubs it away. Pun fully intended.
Pray to God that it's not one of those things that's going to be your friend forever.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
All right, we're gonna go on to our next piece here, and I'm going to be asking you, Andrew, about this. This is about yet another massive failure of the Trump administration. They ended the pandemic early warning program that was designed specifically to detect coronaviruses, which are not a new problem. And White House economists even warned in 2019 that a pandemic could devastate our economy and this country, not to mention kill a boatload of people. What do we have to say about that?
Yeah, so Charles, the initiative that you're talking about is actually called PREDICT. And it also trained and supported staff in about 60 foreign laboratories, including the Wuhan lab that identified the SARS-CoV-2, which was, the whole SARS epidemic, the SARS virus that was going around, and then the new coronavirus that caused COVID-19. So this is, a program that is set up, like you said, precisely to detect pathogens and different viruses that are going on in the world before they spread and become, a pandemic level. So basically, the project was launched by the U.S. Agency for International Development in 2009 under the Obama administration, and it identified over 1,200 different viruses that had the potential to erupt into pandemics, including more than 160 novel coronaviruses, of which the COVID-19 is one of the ones that we've since learned about since then. And the project basically operated on a 5-year grant. And, according to this article in the LA Times, it was unclear whether another 5-year grant would have, dulled the impact of the current pandemic that we're experiencing right now. But the Trump administration has constantly come under fire, with increased criticism for its past moves to kind of downgrade any sort of level of global health security and to kind of take fundamental institution resources away from doing that, whether it be from the World Health Organization or anything like that. Another 5-year grant would have. But yeah, so it caused a whole bunch of problems. And in addition to that, there was a New York Times article that talked about how the White House economists, like you said, published a study last September that warned, a pandemic disease could kill upwards of 500,000 Americans and completely devastate the economy. Outside economists have also been putting out, analyses and, about the optimal length of a shutdown of the economy amid this public health crisis. But there's one other study that actually has been shared with White House officials, according to this New York Times article, and it comes from another author of a 2019 study who is now an economist at Brandeis University and the American Enterprise Institute. But basically, according to her study, the effort would save, nearly 2 million lives when compared with the scenario in which, like Trump's currently doing right now, where there's nothing much being done to suppress, the spread of the virus and what needs to be done, because basically doing nothing would impose a $13 trillion cost in the economy, which, according to the New York Times article, was equal to about 2/3 of the amount of economic activity in the United States that was projected to be generated this year before the virus struck. And then, this study was published the previous fall and had warned that such a comparison between, the flu and this virus, which Trump and all of his administration minions, what I call them, they basically constantly went out there as soon as this virus started taking hold in Wuhan, China, and other places around the world, comparing it to the flu, and, saying that it wasn't going to impact the U.S. economy. But, this study basically lays out a dire warning saying that people who conflate this high cost, expected under the pandemic with the flu are basically doing a huge disservice to society. And, it's suppressing people who might, do different things if they knew about how just terrible this virus is.
Leandro?
Yeah, so I think this is a bigger problem in terms of everything the Trump administration has done. In their effort to kind of make government smaller, they're eliminating all sorts of programs that they have no idea what they do. And I think Andrew has highlighted pretty well like what the early detection program was going to do. But I saw things in the news today talking about the Small Business Administration loans that were released last night, and it was essentially they don't have enough people working on it, so there's a ton of confusion of how it's going to be rolled out, how it's going to be implemented, and exactly how the banks are going to disperse this money, even though it should have been a simple process where it's a 2-page application and basically doling out money to sustain business until June 30th, which is great, but there weren't enough people in the Treasury and Steve Mnuchin's department to kind of hammer out the details. So I think this is, rampant across every branch of government right now that the executive looks over, that they haven't hired a ton of positions, they've eliminated a ton of programs, and the coronavirus is actually laying all of that bare, from early detection to having any sort of stopgap measures in case the economy does fail so brutally like it does now.
I can't think of a worse administration to be facing this kind of test. And it leads us to our next story, which is about the Trump administration letting us know that millions of people might have to wait as long as 5 months to get their $1,200 relief check. That feels like by that time the money isn't even helping in the same way. What's that about? Andrew?
Yeah, so basically there's an article about it in Common Dreams that's pretty comprehensive. And the Trump administration said in a draft plan that was circulated internally on Thursday that people who do not have direct deposit information on file with the IRS, a group that is that Common Dreams notes particularly is a group that is disproportionately low income and also has different minorities in that group. Those people are going to have to wait till September to receive this stimulus. So not only is it affecting, millions of people across the country who don't have access to banking, which is a major problem in the United States, affordable banking, it's affecting the people who are most at risk and people who are most vulnerable in our society. And additionally, the IRS said in the draft plan that it intends to start sending electronic payments by late next week to those with direct deposit information on file from either 2018 or 2019 tax returns, according to the Washington Post. Also, according to the Post, about 8 in 10 taxpayers have signed up for direct deposit payments for their past tax refunds, a number that has grown in recent years. But checks for people who are earning $20,000 or less could, be mailed on May 1st. I mean, so we're even dealing with that. That's basically almost a month away until it even gets mailed. Those, with following incomes of $30,000 or more to $40,000 are going to be on May 8th, and subsequently, each increment by $10,000 more, they'll be mailed out the following week. So the IRS has plans to issue about 5 million checks each week. And late Wednesday, actually, this week, the Trump administration reversed policy guidelines that would have required millions of Social Security recipients to file a tax return in order to receive their payments. However, critics basically said that the reversal needlessly leaves out many people who are on SSI, Social Security insurance recipients, and veterans, people on disability, causing massive delays in payments, once again, to the people who are most vulnerable in our society specifically. I mean, you have to realize when this, this kind of contingency plan is set up by the Trump administration, they have to know full well which particular contingents of society are going to be dramatically impacted by this, because they know who doesn't have access to banking. And if they don't, then they're just completely ignorant. They don't know anything, which is honestly like half of the Trump administration's, prevailing ideology, in addition to this insidious nature of how they kind of go after the working class and the poor and kind of code it in this like race bait language that appeals to, white working class people and things of that nature. But people are going to die because they're not going to get these payments. I mean, it's just clear as day. I mean, the people who need these payments the most are the ones that are going to be the most delayed. And so it just further emphasizes how this style of neoliberal capitalism that's implemented in the United States, has really no interest in the sustainability of people's lives who are, either working class, middle class, or poor.
Thank you for that. Tunde?
Yeah. So I think one thing that we have to be able to do in this crazy era of Trump, but even well beyond Trump, is to tie different stories together, right? So, and anybody can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but there have been stories that have come out recently that have basically talked about the U.S. Postal Service basically teetering on the edge, and that the stimulus package didn't really have anything for them in it. So if you tie that together with the fact that for some people it could take up to 5 months for them to receive their check, and I think some estimates, and I don't know how valid this is, some estimates indicate that the Postal Service basically has up until June or July before things start unraveling completely. You're headed towards a catastrophe, right? Because those in society that actually need that money the most certainly aren't going to get it, as Andrew pointed out. And so I think one thing that we really, really do have to start doing is looking for, in the areas where you see danger, but it's even compounded because of other things that are going on. And so when you put that entire thing together, it's a giant storm that it doesn't look like we have any true plan of how to avoid.
I mean, another part of our economy that's in complete danger right now is the food supply. Farmers, et cetera, fall in that category that Andrew's talking about that won't be receiving those checks anytime soon and are on the lower end of the income scale. And a lot of them are undocumented workers. But the virus has potential to kind of ravage that whole system where we're going to have problems getting our food supply going. So, I mean, restaurants are already in trouble, but like we're talking about the basics, our grocery stores, etc., all our farms. So these are things that I don't think anyone anticipated in the stimulus package.
That's right. And actually, I saw some other article about the many migrants, or mostly migrants, who are picking crops in this country, that they are exceptionally unprepared for this crisis, and it's especially difficult to help them.
Yeah, and you see similar things like that in the UK too. I mean, like there was just a report in the Guardian like last week that showed that the UK could be out of crops, by the in grocery stores by the fall, if they don't do something about how they're dealing with the undocumented, and also people who are there on visas and things of that nature. If they don't do something to protect those vulnerable populations, I mean, the consequences for the rest of society are going to be borne out dramatically.
Right. Well, a sad story all around. But now we're going to go. We haven't really started the fun section yet, but we have a new department here, the "Oh shit, there's Nazis" department. It turns out that our friendly, Führer-loving political adversaries have been barging into progressive Zoom calls all over the place, and it's actually made the headlines. Tunde, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so actually, when I was looking into this story, the thing that kind of jumped off the page to me was the fact that Nazis aren't really, I think, the worst part of this story, if that's somehow possible. So to give everybody sort of an idea of what's going on, if you don't know what Zoom is yet, chances are you are probably unconscious. Once you wake up, you probably will definitely be aware of what Zoom is, because everybody's using it for every bit of communication. In that everybody's having to work remotely. So I guess maybe let's start off with talking about like why Zoom is like unique as like some sort of like video communication program is that basically it combines a couple different things into one, right? So you might use like say something like Skype for video, but then you would need to use another program in order to do video screen sharing, as well as like maybe something for audio. So Zoom essentially combines all that into one, and also it's just easy as fuck to use. It's just so easy. One person has to set the Zoom up, and then they shoot the link out to other people, and the other people just click the one button, and boom, they're in the Zoom meeting. And maybe that's a thing that makes us Americans, right? Is that we love ease of use. We would sell our souls for ease of use, and I'm including myself into that category, right? If I have to take more than 3 or 4 clicks to get into something, I'm probably not going to get into it. It's probably a lost cause. But sometimes, in fact, most times, ease of use can lead to giant clusterfucks, as we're seeing with Zoom. In fact, and it's like the troubles that have been going on with Zoom are, they extend, way back further than what's currently happening. So they had an issue in 2019 with Max, where basically hackers could essentially take control of your camera as well as your audio, so they could listen in to whatever conversation you're having. They could look in with the camera, and so Apple had to essentially kind of quietly get rid of the Zoom program on Mac. On Macs because of that reason, and they say they've since fixed that, but who really knows? And also they do things like sending your information to Facebook, which they say they fixed, but we'll see about that as well. But how we get to Nazis is always a fun phrase to say, is Zoom bombing, which is essentially, since it's so easy to use and all you have to do is send out this one number, essentially people are just guessing numbers, or if you're posting the number on social media, then people are just taking it from social media, and they're just hopping into random meetings. And so that's how we get all these stories of random people, some of which are Nazis, just jumping into classroom meetings, jumping into conferences, and just saying, all this, racist, language, and they can even take control of your screen sharing capabilities to, to put, things like swastikas, all the oldies but goodies, that they do. And so this got so bad that even the FBI had to step in on this past Monday and basically offer tips to, how what people should do to essentially combat this. And so all that leads me to say is look, I think it extends a little bit beyond Nazis in that if you have like sensitive information, if you're doing something that's a little more sensitive, the last thing you want is for anybody or everybody to essentially potentially have access to what it is that you're doing. And so just a couple tips, if you guys will indulge me for a second to sort of kind of help manage that is, for one, if you're setting up a Zoom, or you don't share, and this should go without saying, but I don't know why I have to say it apparently. But don't share the meeting ID on social media, clearly, and password protect the meetings. And then try to do, they have things like waiting rooms for Zoom meetings where you can essentially screen who gets into the meeting. And then you can also, once everybody's into the meeting, you can actually lock the meeting so that nobody else can actually get in. And then also you can manage your screen sharing capabilities so that nobody who's in the meeting can actually take control of the screen and be able to show whatever they want. So doing all those things, I think, helps to essentially combat this sort of Zoom bombing bonanza that's going on. But just people just use common sense, just try to do that and then look into some of the ways you can kind of shore up your meetings, and you'll be better off than if you didn't.
We had a lot of sources for this story, and it made me sad to see that there wasn't a single documented record of Antifa activists Zoom bombing a Nazi Zoom. And you know that there are Nazi Zooms right now. I mean, they can't meet. And while many of them are indeed dumb, they're not so dumb as to have a higher incidence of coronavirus. But I'd love to hear that story if anyone comes across it. Our next story is about social distancing, and there's a concern that this new life that we have now in this country and around the world of being socially distanced at all times is not going to be over and then we're done. It's going to continue in waves for a long time to come. Leandro, how long can we expect this to last?
I mean, I think if you read all the stuff about the coronavirus, they say it's going to be a seasonal virus, just like the flu. It comes and goes, it expands during the wintertime. And if you couple that with the fact that we won't have a vaccine probably for the next, 12 to 14 months, then I think, these social distancing practices are going to continue at least throughout 2020 and probably for a good part of 2021 until we get a vaccine. And, vaccines aren't cures for viruses. They just help kind of point your antibodies to something that may be able to cure it. So I think like this may be a permanent fact of life. Also, I know there's a ton of memes where people are talking about like, so that meeting could have been an email. Well, we're kind of proving that, right? Like, so there are techniques where, where things are now more convenient to do over text or video chat or emails and stuff, and making, business even more efficient in the sense, or work or social interaction. I mean, I, for one, never video chatted anyone or did anything much less than texting, but now like social distancing is forcing you to do those things and maybe forcing you to be less kind of interactive physically or personally or in person. So I think it's going to last at least for the next couple of years. And then we're raising a generation that this is the norm, right? Not necessarily something that is outside of anything that they're not used to. So yeah, it's kind of normalized behavior at this point, especially like these 3 weeks. It shows while it's been tough, people have been adjusting.
Yeah, if I could jump in real quick, Charles. The one thing I can say about that though is that, and to give a little bit of pushback to that is, for some people it's actually more about the connectivity to other people, where you can't really, like, as you can even see on a platform like this, where we're doing a show and it's great, we can all talk to each other, but also sometimes it's a clusterfuck, like, right, you try to talk and somebody else is talking, and then it becomes a game of like chicken, who's going to talk first.
Right.
So you have all these things that kind of depersonalize the experience of interaction. And I can think of places like like in schools, that certainly, I think, knowing, hey, we can do things through, video chats and things like that. But also, I think it just helps to, like, raise a hand, and, the teacher can, call on you, or to catch your teacher for 5 minutes after class, or, just like small things that, you don't necessarily think about until they're not available anymore. And then you're more apprehensive about actually doing those things.
But I will also say that our social gathering places, our restaurants, our bars, our sporting events, they're forever changed. The restaurant industry and the bar industry is devastated. I don't know if there'll ever be like big 20 to 60 seat restaurants anymore, or even like 10 to 12 seats restaurants. A lot of these places aren't going to recover. So while even if social distancing is relaxed, we might not have any places to go.
Wow. People will be forced to stay at home and talk with each other and hang out with friends.
No, nobody wants to do that. Like,
no.
we can.
It sounds terrible.
Also, too, with the music venues and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing concert after concert and music festival after music festival with big headline names like, either canceled or indefinitely postponed or anything like that. And so, kind of getting people able to socially interact in those kind of big forum social gathering events is going to be demonstrably changed in like every single way. I mean, promoters have a certain amount of money like they need to make in order to kind of clear an event to be promoted and to book different artists and things like that. And so just coming at it from my standpoint too, as it additionally working here as at the Real News, but also being a musician myself and playing in a band called Shadow Play, which you guys can check out. But it's really, thanks. we have to cancel like concerts, and we don't have huge festivals and stuff like that. But these concerts of 50 to 100 people, even when they're in kind of close proximity in smaller bars. I mean, that's going to be really difficult to organize moving forward. And I don't think people have really realized the gravity of how that is going to be changed and how long we're going to have to dig out of that in order to get back to what, we perceive as normal.
This is really crazy. I remember as a young person, referring to back when I was your age, Andrew, that I would attend live music venues and so on in order to, drink and check out members of the appropriate gender that I'm into. An entire generation is potentially going to lose this opportunity. What could possibly replace it? What's the future of music?
TikTok, I guess.
Super quick story. I went down a weird TikTok like rabbit hole today. I was so lost. I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, it's just people just dancing. And that's pretty much all TikTok is. And I was like, why is this so popular? I don't know. Maybe I'm being too much of a...
Can we also say, too, for the record, to these Gen Z kids on TikTok who you're talking about who might not have, places to congregate and interact like you and Leandro were talking about, they make the text on these videos so quick. I mean, I feel like I'm reading at like a second grade level when I have to read some of these videos. I mean, like just slow it down by like another second. They try to fit in a whole paragraph in like 5 seconds. And it's like, I don't even know what the hell this means.
Catch up. Time flies, man.
I know.
Has anyone here noticed the rise of the anti-capitalist TikTok video?
Yeah, I was shown one by my 8-year-old cousin. He goes on TikTok and he shows me this anti-capitalist TikTok video, and he's like, "Hey, I thought you would be really interested in this." And I'm like, "Wait, but why? Like, how do you know this much about me?"
What's an example of anti-capitalist TikTok?
Yeah, Charles, this is probably more suited for you.
we're going to have to schedule this for Monday and actually do a nice little session where we have a bunch of them.
Sounds good.
But
Can't wait.
It's the best of modern Gen Z culture. You know, someone is dancing, adding lyrics, and denouncing our neoliberal hellscape. It all works together.
Yeah,
did you see
cap.
Did you see the TikTok in Vietnam about washing your hands? It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, that was the best. That's probably the best TikTok. Yeah, no, that wins the award there.
We just increased their shares, but double fold by spending 5 minutes talking about it.
Just thinking about TikTok as the social media service that the U.S. military has told soldiers not to use because it was made by a Chinese company and therefore it might be suspect. I just want to say, in case our future Chinese overlords are listening in, that's the kind of subversion we want. Thank you. I'm referring to anti-capitalist TikToks, not to military anything.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a very clear distinction there, Charles. We should really key in on that.
Next topic.
Anyway, let's look at this next thing. We have a lovely image here from Groundhog Day. Leandro, I think that's Bill Murray.
Yeah, can I?
Sorry, I didn't mean to say Leandro. I meant to say Dwayne. Thank you, Dwayne. You put it up there. But Leandro, you know and love this movie.
I do. Who doesn't love Groundhog Day?
Exactly.
Truth be told, even as I might be, I might fancy myself a bit of a cinephile, but I have not watched Groundhog Day all the way through. I'll be honest with you.
Andrew,
I have not either.
Explain the entire.
I mean, you don't really have to. You know what happens.
Yeah, that's why I quit the movie halfway through. I know what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill Murray. Moving on, the next story is what's going to happen to my favorite restaurant? Chef Massimo Bottura, Chef Amanda Cohen, Chef Kwame Onwuachi in conversation with Esquire's Jeff Gordinier.
Yep.
This is a video I think that we're going to see. Is that right?
No, it's going to be a video of live tomorrow. Those three are pretty prominent food and beverage industry chefs and food writers. Jeff Gordiner is the traveling food critic for Esquire magazine. There's only like 2 of them left in the United States. Massimo Bottura could be the best chef in the world. He had the best restaurant in the world in Italy. Amanda Cohen runs a restaurant in New York called Dirty Candy, I believe, and she is one of the most outspoken chefs in terms of the restaurant and industry workers' mental health issues and anything against sexism and Me Too generation. And they're going to talk about kind of what the evolution is of what's going to happen in restaurants going forward and kind of build upon what I talked about. I mean, there's a few things that I think is going to be predicted happening. Fine dining restaurants, they're going to stratify even more with the increased scrutiny of being more sanitary and keeping social distancing practices apart. They'll probably become less accessible. We're also finding out like any sort of restaurant model beyond fast casual is tenuous at best. All the margins are razor thin. Employees get crappy wages, and then their wages are really dependent upon, for the most part, the restaurants pass them on to kind of consumer likes or dislikes, be like service or not or that. Seeing that there really hasn't been a safety net for restaurant workers, restaurants, etc. going forward. I mean, it doesn't feel like what people aren't talking about is not just some restaurants are going to fail. Practically the whole industry is probably going to fail going forward if this goes on much longer. There is a 2 Michelin star restaurant, which is about as good as you get if you don't get a 3rd star, but as good as you get in the world, that filed for bankruptcy in Denmark the other day. And if you know anything about Denmark, they highly subsidize every industry. And for something to go under and file for bankruptcy in Denmark, then it's got to be really severe, especially something as popular as a 2-star fine dining restaurants, which kind of sent shivers throughout the industry because what happens to the old mom and pop shops here, especially in Baltimore and DC, etc. Like, how are they going to survive this for any extended period of time? A lot of them are doing kind of, and to go back to what Charles was talking about in the beginning, I've been going to a lot of these restaurants that are doing carry out and takeout and trying to support them as much as I can, but it's just not enough. So if you are visiting restaurants and doing carry out these days, they're like on skeleton crews, and it's only a matter of time before they're going to close. So hopefully the stimulus does help them, but like the quick answer, what's going to happen to your favorite restaurant, is it may not exist in like 2 or 3.
My heart goes out to the ones that are obviously owned by a family where you've got, various relatives of different generations working there. They can't even lay people off to save themselves. Their whole family's economic fortunes are connected to that one enterprise. And if it goes away,
and to go back to our original kind of like, this has been happening to Asian restaurants since December, ever since the coronavirus, was found to be true in China. There have been a lot of discriminations related to Asian restaurants, and people essentially have stopped going. On the flip side, it's pretty good. Like if you go grocery shopping these days, if you go to H Mart, it's pretty empty and everyone's wearing gloves and masks, and you can get everything you need, but it's still being avoided due to racist stigma. And like a bunch of Chinese and Asian restaurants have already closed. In San Diego, there's a ton of restaurants doing takeout and delivery, but for the most part, a lot of the Chinese restaurants have closed down because they're afraid of racism and hate, et cetera, and they're just not operating their businesses.
Is there, where we are in Baltimore, is there a list of Asian restaurants that are still open? Because I actually noticed when I was looking for food the other day that some of the places I would normally go to were not picking up their phone. They weren't doing any delivery or takeout.
We're actually doing a survey as part of Chinatown Collective and Trump City Night Market of which restaurants are open, and we're trying to survey how much of the revenue they've lost since it should be done. I don't know when, but like maybe in the next couple of weeks or so. So yeah, we'll have a list soon.
That sounds like great, important work. Thank you for that. We're going to move on to our final fun segment and last segment for the show today, and that is about symbiotes. So I think I'm going to have to turn to Tunde and ask you, what is this about symbiotes? What are we not getting here?
Yeah, look, we got Trump, and that was pretty, out there. We have coronavirus, right? And I believe, everybody's gone back now and watched the movie Contagion. It's kind of, life simulating art. And now we're in the realm where symbiotes are a thing now. Dwayne, hit the video.
Like Venom?
So one thing like that.
So, yeah, that's the thing now. So those who are familiar with Spider-Man, and I don't know if you could play that video, but those who are familiar with Spider-Man's lore, are familiar with this idea of symbiote. It's basically like this weird black goo that comes from outer space and takes over someone's body, and it famously takes over Spider-Man's body. So that's what that thing looked like, is this symbiote situation. But then people had some sort of, funny reactions to it, like the obvious, of course, oh, that's the manifestation of coronavirus we got. But then Dwayne, and I don't know if we have the Creepshow video, but I don't know if, and to prove that I'm a cinephile, I've watched Creepshow and Creepshow 2. So you have this person saying, nah, man, this is the ish that was in Creepshow 2, The Raft, which I remember very distinctly from growing up, which was gross and terrible and robbed me of my nice dreams for months. And then we also have pretty much like how they say we should take care of this. So Dwayne, I don't know if we can play that video as well. But there, you have Ripley basically saying, I say we nuke the entire thing and just take off, which is pretty much everybody's like response to I think everything these days is just fuck it all, destroy it all, and let's take off. So yeah, if you didn't feel safe before, you should certainly feel safe now that we have weird goo that looks like it's got a mind of its own. Yeah, that's a thing now.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to examine examine that goo later, but I have a very important question here. Is that the same kind of goo that was in Venom?
Yeah, that is venom. Yeah, so that goo eventually does make venom. Again, if you're familiar with the Spider-Man scenarios, and there we go. So yeah, we might want to figure out what happened to that person. See what their fate was, because they might be walking around biting people's heads off. The rumor is that's actually a nest of worms that are caught in some sort of oil, it would appear. So it might actually have some environmental issues there that are actually scary. But who the hell knows? It might actually be a symbiote. I don't know.
That's Planet Earth in 2020 pandemic time. Even the ocean worms aren't safe.
Yeah, it's adding to my theory that we're in an alternative universe where up is down, down is up, left is right. Everything is just everything's too much right now.
And it's going to be the same next week. And we hope you'll join us on Monday for the next episode of Stir Crazy. We may have found our footing here, but if you have any comments to throw our way, feedback, TikTok videos, this is your chance. Thank you so much to Leandro, Tunde, and Andrew. Thank you.